I promised you a little bit further introduction of our guest scholar this weekend, although I put the word guest in quotation marks for reasons that will become apparent. Dr. Mark Chancey is professor of religious studies at SMU's Dedman College of Humanities and Sciences. SMU recently named him a university distinguished professor. He serves on the editorial boards of two journals, Religion and Education and the Journal of the American Academy of Religion. He is an active member and partner of many of us in the Texas Freedom Network, as well as in Christians Against Christian Nationalism. His 4 reports on public school Bible courses for the Texas Freedom Network are standard starting points for understanding the issues that we're going to have a chance to explore this weekend. Dr. Chancey earned his PhD in New Testament from Duke, and he has done extensive research on the intersection of biblical studies and Jewish studies and archaeology, publishing 3 books in that field. The reason I say put guest in quotation marks is that it's actually kind of hard to count how many times we've benefited from Dr. Chancey's teaching here at Temple. There are at least 4 official occasions that he has served as our scholar in residence, but he is simply a friend and a companion and an ally in so much of the work that we at Temple do that the word guest doesn't really work. You've heard me say over the last few weeks that for me, Mark Chancey is a sterling example of what it means to be a public intellectual. And I like the term even better for him of scholar activist, because he's on the front lines of the issues of freedom and of separation of church and state that we care so deeply about. And he does it with a sense of intellectual depth and academic credibility that means that everything he says on these matters is rooted in the deepest sense of knowledge and commitment. He is an invaluable ally to us at Temple Emanu-El, and also to many of us, a treasured friend. I said to Cantor Nyron when she was looking out, I said, yeah, well, you know, it's Chancey groupies. It's what happens when Mark Chancey shows up somewhere. So I won't ask you to raise your hand if you're a Chancey groupie, because Nancy and I would have to raise ours. So let's just welcome Dr. Mark Chancey as our teacher this weekend.
Very kind. Yeah, it's good. Well, that was an extremely gracious introduction, and I appreciate it. Whenever my family and I visit here, we're just overwhelmed with how warm and welcoming you are, and tonight is no exception. Just your hospitality and graciousness move me, and my family as well. So thank you for the opportunity to join you tonight for the David Lefkowitz Memorial Lecture. It's really a privilege to be here. I was so excited to receive the invitation to be able to join you again. And you invited me to speak about a subject about which I am passionate. When religion enters public schools. Now, for our purposes, when I talk about religion this weekend, I'll be talking about primarily religion in the curriculum, teaching about religion. And when I talk about public schools, I'll be talking primarily about kindergarten through 12th grade. Public schools, K through 12, are allowed to provide instruction about religion if it is done appropriately. But public schools are not allowed to promote religious agendas upon their students. And yet we find ourselves in a situation where some are trying to blur those distinctions. In such situations, it is helpful to learn from voices of the past, but not yet. There we go. It is the Rabbi David Lefkowitz Memorial Lecture, and so let us talk about Rabbi David Lefkowitz, because Rabbi Lefkowitz was nationally known for speaking out on these exact issues. Before coming to Temple Emanu-El in 1920, Lefkowitz was the rabbi of what is now Temple Israel in Dayton, Ohio, and he was an outspoken, persistent critic of school-sponsored religious exercises in Dayton and beyond. He was particularly vocal in his opposition to school-sponsored Bible reading, where schools would read a passage each day from the Bible to their captive audience of students, often from the New Testament, whether in opening assembly or in homeroom. Lefkowitz rightly saw this as a religious exercise, a religious practice that was being imposed on young, impressionable children. In 1904, the Central Conference of American Rabbis appointed Lefkowitz chair of a new committee focused on sectarianism in public institutions. And that committee quickly evolved into the Committee of Church and State, of which Lefkowitz was the first chair. He would later go on to be president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. The Committee on Church and State closely monitored religion in public schools, especially school-sponsored Bible reading. And in 1906, it published an essay that Lefkowitz wrote on the subject titled, "Why the Bible Should Not Be Read in the Public Schools." You can read this online if you go to Google Books and search for it. It is there for free. This served as a resource for people across the country for years, and this essay was published in 1922, shortly after Rabbi Lefkowitz arrived here at Temple Emanu-El. While serving here, Rabbi Lefkowitz made a point of monitoring religion and public education issues here in Dallas, and he communicated his concerns to local school officials when necessary. Lefkowitz's booklet explains why it is so important for schools to avoid imposing religious teachings and practices on students. Our nation, he insisted, was founded on the principle of separation of church and state, separation of religion and government. And he argued to put religious exercises into the public school is to unite church and state, and so to rebel against the spirit of the Constitution. Public schools, he argued, were established not by the members of a particular sect, by the members of a particular religious group to educate their own children, but by the people as a whole, so that all the children of the land might receive the instruction that would fit them for citizenship, preparing all the children of the land for citizenship, regardless of their religion or lack thereof. That was and is the mission of public education. Public schools, Lefkowitz explained, are supported by taxes paid by every member of the community, whatever the character of his creed, even though he disavow any creed, and without regard to the question of whether or no he has children of school age to take advantage of the educational opportunities thus provided. Which is to say, we all support public schools with our taxes. They belong to all of us, regardless of whether or not we claim a religion. So I was commenting to my family when coming, I had a special kippah that I wanted to wear. But the difference between now and the last time that I wore it is that the last time I wore it, I had hair. And I could clip it in quite naturally. Lest it be a distraction, I've been advised that it's okay that I'm not. So I did my very best. I could not bring the hair back. I tried. Public schools are supported by the taxes of every member of the community, whatever the character of his creed. It doesn't matter what religion we are. We all pay for taxes. We all support public education, and public education affects all of us. To be sure, we have many good choices available to us, right? Public education is not the choice of all of our families. Private schools are a wonderful option. Home schools are a wonderful option. We are so fortunate to have so many good options. But public schools educate 80% of the children in the United States. We all pay for them, and what happens in public schools affects our society and affects each of us. Rabbi Lefkowitz, in 1906, thought that we were making progress as a nation to that day when public schools would no longer play religious favorites. he would be surprised to learn how far we still have to go. Consider the things happening around us. Let us look first to our northern neighbor, Oklahoma, where we've just witnessed a particularly brazen attempt to play religious favorites. In June 2024, the state superintendent of public instruction, who shall go unnamed, declared that all school districts would incorporate the Bible, which, he pointed out, includes the Ten Commandments, into their instruction for grades 5 through 12. He proclaimed further that every teacher, every classroom in the state will have a Bible in the classroom and will teach from that Bible. If you followed the story, you know what came next. The superintendent issued a call for vendors to provide Bibles for the classes. And he included specs for those Bibles that were very specific. The Bibles had to be King James translation, a classic Protestant translation. And they had to include the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, which are actually not a part of the Bible. The clear goal was to send the message to students that Protestant Christian identity and American identity go hand in hand. Only one edition of the Bible anywhere qualified, and it was the God Bless the USA Bible, promoted by Lee Greenwood, who is proud to be an American. So, let us be candid. This entire episode was outrageous, but there is something to learn from it, because from the very beginning, many Oklahomans made clear that they opposed this blatant effort to foist particular religious views on students. Parents, teachers, clergy, school district officials, regular citizens all protested. For over a year, they pushed back against this unconstitutional mandate. People filed a lawsuit to stop it. Legislators refused to fund it. The superintendent was forced to rely on private donations that didn't bring in nearly the number of Bibles that he wanted. And then, last month, he resigned. And when the new superintendent came in, looking at the pattern of resistance that had played out over the past year and a half, he rescinded the mandate. The lesson is that sometimes it takes a while. But when people speak out, like Oklahomans spoke out, like Rabbi Lefkowitz spoke out a century ago, it can make a difference. Here in Texas, we have our own challenges. This year, the Texas legislature passed a law requiring school boards to vote on whether to create a period of prayer and reading of Bible and or other religious texts. So schools that create this period will in effect be promoting religious exercises. You know, the irony in this is that children in schools already have the right to pray and read scripture on their own time in ways that are not disruptive to others. They already have that right. So this law doesn't solve any problems. Instead, this law creates problems. How in the world will this work? Are schools going to need to separate praying students from non-praying students? Are they going to need to separate students by religious group? Highlighting religious differences can be divisive and even dangerous if it highlights particular groups for bullying. Rabbi Lefkowitz wrote, "It is the duty of the school to make its children realize that they are one, whatever their religious differences. But religious exercises, however carefully conducted, emphasize those differences." School boards are still voting on whether or not to create this period, which means that once again there are opportunities for citizens to weigh in and communicate their concerns. And again, public participation can have an impact on what happens here. And then there are the new language arts lessons that Texas created for use in kindergarten through 5th grade. In the spring of 2024, the Texas Education Agency announced these new lessons, noted that many of them focused on religion and many of them focused on the Bible. Now again, teaching about religion in public schools is legal as long as it is done appropriately in ways that don't privilege religion over non-religion and that don't privilege particular religious views over others. Bluebonnet learning, I am sad to say, clearly and explicitly privileges Christianity. It devotes more lessons to Christianity than to any other religious tradition. It devotes more lessons to the Bible than to any other sacred text, the Christian Bible. It devotes more lessons to Jesus than to any other religious figure. It introduces stories from the Bible, many of them from the New Testament, as early as age 5, and presents those stories in ways likely to promote their religious claims. At times it distorts and misrepresents Bible stories. For example, one of its 2 lessons on Esther teaches, throughout the story of Esther, she shows her faithfulness or trust in God. This is a remarkable claim, since, as you know, the book of Esther does not even include the word God and never mentions faith. Here, Esther appears to be praying, which also does not happen in the Bible. In addition, Bluebonnet Learning argues that the story of Esther is ultimately about religious freedom. And yet, when one actually reads Esther, one discovers that religious freedom is not at the top of her list of concerns. Esther is worried about her people's basic survival. Not religious freedom. Another example of Bluebonnet's distortions. It portrays Esther as a paragon of nonviolent resistance. But if one reads the book of Esther all the way to the end, which the writers of the 2 lessons on Esther did not do, one discovers that it ends in extreme violence, this time aimed against those who had threatened the Jews of Persia, but it is violence of which Esther approves. Esther is a beautiful book, and Esther is an amazing, fascinating, and inspiring character, but she is no paragon of nonviolence. Bluebonnet distorts biblical material. It shoehorns religion into lessons in the strangest of ways. Bluebonnet even found a way to Christianize the story of Goldilocks. If Goldilocks had simply heeded the teachings of Jesus, she would have left those poor bears alone. I am not making this up. And yet with Bluebonnet also, public pushback has made a major impact. Citizens across the state protested against Bluebonnet. Individuals, organizations, congregations, many people here at Temple Emanu-El protested and participated in this in various ways. Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, atheists, humanists. The result? The state actually made a lot of changes to the original form of those lessons. The lessons, as problematic as they are, and they are very problematic, are much better than they were. Furthermore, because so many people across the state have made such a ruckus about the unacceptability of the religion-related lessons, only about 1/3 of the state's school districts have adopted them at all. And many of the districts that have adopted them are leaving out the religion lessons. Once again, people speaking out, like Lefkowitz did a century ago, made a difference. If you'd like to learn more about Bluebonnet, consider this my plug for tomorrow's Lunch and Learn. And then we have the 10 Commandments. Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas have passed laws requiring public schools to post the 10 Commandments on classroom walls. This movement is broader than just those 3 states. This year alone, 20 additional states considered passing such laws. 20 additional states. The Texas law, like the other laws, like most of that legislation, specifies a particular version of the Ten Commandments to be displayed. It is a version that is not actually found in anyone's Bible. It comes instead from the Ten Commandments monument at the Texas State Capitol in Austin, a monument donated by an organization called the Fraternal Order of Eagles in 1961. The words on that monument come not from Sinai, but from St. Cloud, Minnesota, where in the late 1940s and the early 1950s, a local committee consisting of a group of Christian ministers and one single but very prominent Reform rabbi created what they considered to be a religiously neutral version of the Ten Commandments. For the rest of that story, you'll need to come at 9 o'clock. Of course, that committee was wrong to think that it had created a neutral version of the Ten Commandments, because you cannot have a neutral version of the Ten Commandments. Posting the Ten Commandments in public school classrooms promotes religion over non-religion. It promotes Judaism and Christianity over other religious traditions, and because of the particular wording of that monument, it promotes Protestant Christianity over Catholicism and Judaism. Lawsuits have been filed against all of these laws and are making their way through the courts, but we nervously await their final resolution. There are better, more appropriate ways to teach about religion in public schools than these approaches. The Supreme Court has identified a basic principle for doing so in a foundational ruling on this issue, and that ruling is the 1963 decision, Abington Township School District v. Shemp, which prohibited school-sponsored Bible reading. Rabbi Lefkowitz always hoped that he would see a case make it to the Supreme Court prohibiting Bible reading. He didn't quite make it. He passed away in 1955. In 1956, a young high school student in Pennsylvania named Ellery Shemp protested what he saw as a violation of religious freedom. When his teacher read from the Bible that day, Ellery Shemp quietly read from the Quran. Eventually, the school put a stop to this. And 2 years later, the Shemp family filed a lawsuit challenging the practice. When their case finally arrived at the Supreme Court, the court ruled that school-sponsored Bible reading was a government-imposed religious exercise and thus a violation of the First Amendment. It was the outcome that Lefkowitz had looked forward to. Here we see the Shemp family, Unitarians, reading the Bible. Now, the Supreme Court has often been accused of banning the Bible from public schools in Shemp, but they did nothing of the sort. To the contrary, the court affirmed the desirability of studying about the Bible and about religion in general from a secular perspective. Justice Tom C. Clark penned that decision. He was a native Dallasite who's buried in Restland Cemetery. Here's the central quotation for our purposes. It might well be said that one's education is not complete without the study of comparative religion or the history of religion and its relationship to the advancement of civilization. It certainly may be said that the Bible is worthy of study for its literary and historic qualities. Nothing we have said here indicates that such study of the Bible, when presented objectively as part of a secular program of education, may not be affected consistently with the First Amendment. So according to Shemp, schools can teach about religion for the sake of cultural literacy. The problem is not that schools teach about religion. The problem arises when schools teach about religion the wrong way. And the initiatives we've discussed tonight, I would argue, all fall short of the benchmarks of Shemp, that instruction be secular and objective. What does it mean to teach about religion objectively as part of a secular program of education? Well, there are basic principles that scholars and lawyers and civil libertarians have devised along with educators. Schools should teach about religion in ways that don't promote or disparage religion in general don't promote or disparage non-religion, and don't promote or disparage particular religious viewpoints. They teach about religion's roles in history and society without nudging students towards particular religious positions. They educate about a variety of religions and not promote just one. And they educate in age-appropriate ways that recognize and respect stages of child development. Teaching about religion these ways adheres to the Schempp decision, and it serves the common good by helping students, helping citizens, understand religious differences and demonstrate respect across those differences. And those are skills that we desperately need in our public square. It is possible to teach about religion in ways that honor the separation of church and state, in ways that respect religious diversity, in ways that promote religious freedom. And yet, freedom requires vigilance. And Rabbi Lefkowitz reminds us across the decades that we have to do all we can to be vigilant to ensure that schools remain a place where all the children of the land receive the education that they deserve. Thank you.